New Jersey Governor Chris Christie spending the first full day as a presidential campaign in New Hampshire.
He's got a terribly uphill slog.
The best politicians are the ones that end up learning from their defeats, learning from their big setbacks.
Look at New Jersey's economy. Now they've had credit downgrade after credit downgrade. The unemployment rate is still higher than the national average.
All the steam that's been let out of the balloon since 2012, and how does he recapture that?
Jeb Bush, meanwhile, released more than 3 decades of tax returns.
The former governor's net worth is upwards of $22 million.
Donald Trump's a novelty candidate.
Trump's surging, both in Iowa, New Hampshire, nationally. I mean, there clearly is some real interest in his candidacy.
Right now, there's a first tier, it's Jeb Bush. There's a second tier, it's Trump. And there's a third tier, it's everybody else.
Well, that's sad if true. We are now 1 month to the first GOP debate, and this year is a little different. With the largest field of the modern era, debate organizers are, of course, only allowing the top 10 candidates on the stage. So while New Jersey Governor Chris Christie just entered the race this week, he knows that making the debate is the first hurdle facing his brand new candidacy. Now, he was in Maine today. You see him there getting an endorsement from the governor. But this debate issue was front and center.
I intend to be on the stage, and I intend to speak my mind, and I'm sure that will go well for us. And then after we win the nomination, you're going to get to spend a whole week in Cleveland, Ohio, to be able to watch us accept the nomination next July.
But right now, that would still be an uphill climb. A brand new poll out today finding Christie lagging behind 8 other candidates, including Donald Trump, at number 2 behind Jeb Bush, which people have been talking about. And remember, the latest 5 national polls will determine precisely who makes that top 10 cut for the first debate, which is on August 6th. Now, as Dave Catanese of U.S. News and World Report writes, summer polling has never been more important. And joining me now, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican Party Chair Michael Steele, and our own Chuck Todd, moderator, of course, of Meet the Press. Thank you both for being here.
Hey, buddy. Hey.
Chuck, this debate issue seems to be coming up for Republicans in a way they didn't initially expect when they made these rules.
No, and I think, look, I say this, I'm glad we don't have the first debate. Okay, I don't envy the position that Fox and CNN are in, trying to figure out how you do it. I think in hindsight, they probably both wish they would have just said, we're doing 2 debates, 7 and 7, you know, and just not trying to pick a tier at this point because it's too early in the process. Isn't fair to the candidates. I understand why they did it. You feel the need because you can't have. We've done a 10-candidate debate. We did one the last 2 cycles. It's too many. And I get that that's the max you can do. But it has turned, what it's doing is it's turning a couple things. It's turning candidates into looking for odd ways to stay in the news. Look at Ted Cruz and the Simpsons thing. Mm-hmm. It's actually very cute and all this stuff.
Sure.
But all of these campaigns have to start thinking about things like that just to keep them relevant in the news. Or they may say crazy stuff to electrify themselves with just 1% more of the electorate, which gets them from 13th place to 8th place.
Well, and Chuck, you're speaking candidly when you say we don't have it. The news organization doesn't have to lead this process. But
well, the RNC could have, and you know, look, they did. I think they wanted it, but at the same time, they didn't want to be the ones to get rid of candidates. I think it's very hard for a news organization to be the one at the beginning of a process to limit them. I mean, it's as if we're all dealing with this, but it's like. Yeah. We in the you know, is it our job to tell which candidates are allowed on stage and which aren't? I'm surprised both Fox and CNN.
I agree with Chuck. I've been saying for a lot of time now. This is not the process. The process divided up 2 nights, open it up. Don't even do the traditional debate format. Allow a series of questions to each candidate, no rebuttal. Just because you've got, like you said, such an untenable number of people. You want to give everybody a chance to speak. Make that 1 or 2 debates, the first 2 debates, and then you can begin. It'll narrow.
It's self-winnowing.
Yeah, at that point.
Do you think the GOP should still try to change this now?
Yes, they should. And I've been talking to some of the folks inside the building, and there is this idea to what Chuck is saying that they've got to do something because Fox is in an untenable situation. And look, if I'm the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, and this is in my state, and I'm not on the stage, you think he's just going to go quietly into that good night? No, there's going to be, to your point, ways to make noise that's not going to be good for the party.
And to defend the RNC here, they do want to try to help fix this. but they have 170 members, you know them very well, with 170 different opinions on how this should work. So this isn't exactly an easy thing for Chairman Priebus or his colleagues.
Let me ask, and then I want to get to Jeb Bush's money too, because I want to talk about his bank account and the money he's been stacking. He's been doing quite well. But on the debate issue, final question, Chuck. Can you come back from being off that stage? You hear the candidates and their aides talk about it. It's like, you got to be on there.
See, I think you can. That's Rick Santorum. Rick Santorum at all the early debates. So what did we do? I think we started this. We basically, we formatted the debate from highest polling out. So if you were the lowest person polling, you were on one of the ends, which was almost not being in the debate. And you could ask Santorum, will joke about it. He said, yeah, when I went in the polls, I was barely on the stage with me and the curtain guy type of thing. And he barely got any questions. And 5 months later, he's the last man standing with Romney. So I don't think this is do or die. But it's harder for a Kasich not to be in. It depends on who it is. It's not do or die for a Carly Fiorina, I think, actually.
Although the imagery is bad with her.
The imagery is bad. But I think some of these candidates have the ability to break back in. It's harder for a mainstream candidate.
I agree.
Who's trying to go the traditional establishment route, a la Kasich. I think that's harder for him.
Right, because he doesn't have that
Lindsey
same
Graham
traction.
too.
Right.
Yeah.
Turning to Jeb Bush, which is the other big news, $28 million since leaving the governor's mansion, Chuck. But he's been very careful about how to manage that money, not to necessarily do what a tax lawyer will tell you to do, which is we can maximize everything. What do you think that tells us about the life he's been living and his interest in this office?
I would say he's been preparing to run for president since the day he left the governor's office. And you gotta, it was fascinating yesterday, a tale of two disclosures, and I know you're going to get the Hillary emails. But, you know, here you have Jeb Bush controlling his disclosure. And yes, there are things he's not released and all, but it's been on his terms so far. It is actually a blueprint for how you do this. He saw how Mitt Romney screwed this up with the tax returns. He watched how the Clintons, who could have controlled this process on their own, decided to let sort of make it look like you're extracting information out of them rather than them putting it out there. And he is controlled. I have to say, he's unprepared on Iraq, still doesn't know how to handle his brother. I think he's still got some, but on certain things, how he rolled out his email, how he dealt with some of these transparency issues, you can tell he's been thinking about this a long time.
Michael, do you agree with that? And this idea that people come out of office nowadays and make so much. This is not someone who happens to be rich, Mitt Romney, coming out of business. This is someone who is basically a public servant and then turns over an incredible amount of money for what? For being an ex-governor?
Well, I mean, there's that, but then there's also, the family, the family business, such as it is, to the extent that there's any residual.
He wasn't a pauper going into the governor's mansion.
Right.
I mean, he wasn't a real estate developer before he did it.
Yeah, it wasn't poor going in the door, so it's a little bit more to maximize on the way out. But there are two things. One, Chuck is right in terms of how the Bush team has handled this aspect of their campaign. The transparency and the disclosures, I think, have worked to his good stead here, and he seems to be now the bar that everyone needs to reach in terms of how you do this. Certainly the Clintons should be paying attention, probably not, but they should be. On the money side of it, it's the business of politics now. I mean, you've got some folks, and you've read some of the stories about those who are running. Why are they really running? What book are they promoting? What is the end game here? And that's another part of this that I think we're going to see more and more of as these disclosures come into play, as these candidates roll out how they're making their money and how they've made their money.
Do you realize his net worth might be less than Hillary's?
Yeah.
I would have been, if I'd have told you that a Bush was going to be worth less than a Clinton, you'd be surprised. It might be less than Carly. We won't know until we see the full personal financial disclosures. Might be less than Carly Fiorina, might be less than Ben Carson, might be less than Donald Trump if we get the real numbers out of him. Might be less than John Kasich, who made a bunch of money before he went in the governor's.
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting. There's this assumption the Bush family is incredibly, and by the way, he's very wealthy.
They're wealthy.
But he's only going to be among the top 5 of wealth, not over and above everybody else.
Yeah, well, they say the 1% isn't what it used to be. I want to hit on...
Apparently, half the 1% is running for president. That's what we're finding out.
I want to hit on Elizabeth Warren before we go, because, Chuck, I know you find this interesting. She says to the Boston Herald, I love what Bernie is talking about. Elizabeth Warren saying, I love what Bernie's talking about. It's one thing to say, I respect the guy, it's nice to have him in the race. This is a bit more, no?
Wouldn't it be weird if she didn't I think she'd be disappointing her sort of political followers if she somehow did.
You think this is the bare minimum?
I think it's the bare minimum. I think he's trying so hard to channel her. You would hope that she would reward him with simply saying, I like what he's saying. She's not necessarily, I guess I would have been surprised if it were anything less.
Okay. Well, that's why I ask, because sometimes the answer disputes the premise of the question. I think we both know that. The chairman and Chuck Todd both stay. The other big political news today, a brand new batch of Hillary Clinton emails, what we were just talking about. Clinton fans and detractors parsing their meaning. We're going to go right to the source with the Clinton campaign official. That is next. Plus, investigators trying to determine if a fire that burned down a historic black church in South Carolina last night was a mistake, Mother Nature, or potentially an arson. And later, the U.S. women's soccer team beating the best team in the world, advancing to the World Cup finals. All that's ahead on a busy show. Stay with us.